Welcome to another historical fiction author chat. And today I am speaking with Daisy Wood, who is also known earlier as, in her other books, in her YA books, as Jenny Walters. And I'm very happy that you could join me today, Daisy. Thank you very much. And
well, thank you for inviting me. I'm so happy to be here.
I'm excited. We're going to talk about The Clockmaker's Wife, which has a beautiful cover I just happened to spot. And we're going to hear all about that. So everybody sit back. As I always say, sit back and grab your tea or cocoa and biscuit. Every time I speak with someone over at the UK, I suggest people have a biscuit. Otherwise, it's a cookie. But sit back, relax, and enjoy. I'm going to read Daisy's bio first, and then the synopsis of The Clockmaker's Wife, and then I will turn it over to Daisy. Daisy Wood worked as an editor in children's publishing for several years before starting to write stories of her own. She has over 20 children's books published under various names, including the Swallow Cliff Hall series for teens, based around the English country house through the years and the servants who keep it running. And that's what Jenny Walters is her name for those ones. She loves the process of historical research and is a keen member of the London Library, which houses a wonderful collection of old magazines and newspapers, as well as books. The Clockmaker's Wife is her first published novel for adults. She studied English literature at Bristol University and recently completed a creative writing MA at City University in London, where she lives with her husband, a rescue dog from Greece, and a fluffy gray cat. Lovely. And now to The Clockmaker's Wife. It's the height of the Blitz in 1940, and too dangerous for Nell Spelman and her baby daughter Alice to stay in London. She must leave behind her husband Arthur, one of the clockmakers responsible for keeping Big Ben tolling. The huge clock at the Palace of Westminster has become a symbol of hope in Britain's darkest hour and must be protected at all costs. When Arthur disappears in mysterious circumstances, Nell suspects evil forces are at work and returns to the war-torn city to save both the man and the country she loves. Over 80 years later in New York, Alice's daughter Ellie finds a beautiful watch with a cracked face among her mom's possessions and decides to find out more about the grandmother she never knew. Her search takes her to England, where her relatives are hiding shocking secrets of their own, and where she begins to wonder whether the past might be better left alone. Could her grandparents possibly have been traitors at the heart of the British establishment? Yet Ellie feels Nell at her shoulder, guiding her towards a truth which is more extraordinary than she could ever have imagined. This sounds like a lot of fun. I'm excited.
Well, I hope readers like it.
Yes, I know they will. And we should say now that the ebook is already available. The actual paperback is released July 27th here in Calgary, but if you are an ebook reader, then you can get that. And if you're not, then you should pre-order right now. So now I will disappear and I will throw this over to you, Daisy. I'm looking forward to listening.
And we're in London. It's April 1939. Not much further, Arthur calls down to Nell, who is labouring up the stone spiral staircase behind him. She's wearing new shoes that have rubbed a blister on the back of her heel, and it's been a long day, but she knows how much this visit means to Arthur, so she perseveres. He's rightly proud of his work, maintaining the clocks at the Palace of Westminster, and she knows it's taken some negotiation with the keeper of the clock for permission to show her the greatest one of all. The huge turret clock that Nell, in her ignorance, used to call Big Ben. Arthur had quickly put her right. Big Ben, she knows now, refers to the vast bell that strikes the hours rather than the clock itself. She's learned a lot about this clock since meeting Arthur, or rather she would have learned a lot if she weren't so distracted by his steady brown eyes, gazing intently into hers, by the hollows under his cheekbones and the bluish stubble around his jaw, by that mysterious male presence that takes the words out of her mouth and the breath from her lungs. Sometimes they can talk for hours, and it seems as though they've known each other for years. More often, she simply stares at the way his curly hair springs up from his forehead, or the curve of his beautiful mouth, and wonders how long she'll have to wait until he's kissing her. She thinks about him all the time. He's on her mind from first thing in the morning until last thing at night, and people have begun to notice. The headmistress has had to have sharp words with Nell about leaving her personal life at home. So now she smiles back at Arthur and tells him she's fine, slips off her shoes and limps after him in her stockinged feet. First, he takes her to the clockmaker's room, where their tools and equipment are stored. Technically, Arthur is employed by Saunders, an external company of clock and watchmakers, rather than the Palace of Westminster. Yet the palace is where he and his colleagues spend most of their time, winding, adjusting and maintaining the hundreds of clocks that mark the hours as Parliament goes about its business. There are two other clockmakers apart from Arthur, Ralph Watkinson, whom he likes, and Bill Talbot, whom he doesn't. Their room is low-ceilinged with short windows beneath the overhanging dials above. Arthur shows her the workbench where his tools are neatly arranged, ready for the morning. "Sure I'm not boring you?" he asks, and she hastens to reassure him. "You are a dear girl to be so interested," he says, blushing a little, and his flush deepens when she catches sight of her photograph in pride of place on the shelf, self-conscious in pearls and an evening gown. Dropping his eyes, he exclaims over her lack of shoes and binds her bleeding heel with his handkerchief, taking such care that she melts under his touch. She's longing for him to kiss her when he straightens up, but instead he unlocks the door to an inspection hatch and shows her the weights running up and down the central shaft of the tower. She can just make them out far below in the gloom. There are 3 weights, he explains, controlling the 3 gear trains by which the great clock operates. The striking train driving the hammer which drops against Big Ben, the chiming train that controls the quarter bells, and the going train that powers the clock hands. The striking and chiming trains are wound back up by electric motor when they reach the bottom of the shaft, Arthur says, but the going train has to be wound by hand 3 times a week. Goodness. Nell could listen to him talk all evening, although to be perfectly honest, she pays more attention to his dimples than she does to the gear trains. He wants to share his great passion with her, and she knows this is a significant moment. Who would have thought the workings of a turret clock could be so romantic? Arthur takes Nell's hand and leads her through the gallery behind the 4 huge dials. Dusk is falling, and the light bulbs behind each clock face are blazing. People on the ground over 300 feet below will be looking up to check the time as they hurry to meet friends or lovers or head home after work. Nell peers up at the milky glass. She can't see through to the Roman numerals on the other side, but Arthur tells her they're over 2 feet high, and the minute hand is 14 feet long. The scale is awe-inspiring. After this excitement, they go up another flight of stairs to see the clock mechanism itself, an intricate arrangement of wheels, cogs, levers and ratchets laid out on a flatbed frame. The machinery was made in Victorian times, a work of art combining beauty and precision. Nell's face is beginning to ache from all the smiling when a tremendous racket starts above their heads, the smaller bells ringing out the quarter hour. She and Arthur put their hands over their ears, beaming at each other. "I do love you," she thinks, and wonders when she'll find the courage to tell him. Probably not tonight. He seems in a strange mood, preoccupied, distracted, distant. He's probably tired after a day's work, and of course he's worried about the current state of affairs on the continent, along with everyone else. They had a long conversation about that alarming little man Hitler the other night. Arthur's parents are German, but they moved to England before he was born, which, as things have turned out, was just as well. At last, the Westminster chimes die away, and the fly fans high up in the room come to a noisy, clattering halt. Falling well and truly under the spell of this extraordinary place, Nell hurries after Arthur, up another flight of stairs to the belfry, where Big Ben hangs in state. A caged beast behind an iron fence, with the quarter bells arranged around him like planets orbiting the sun. She leans over the wire mesh barrier to lay her hand against his great scarred side and stand for a moment, drinking in the quiet atmosphere. Arthur, however, is in a hurry. He wants to show her the Ayrton light, which is lit when either House of Parliament is sitting after dark. Frowning, he looks at his watch and hustles her towards the open metal staircase, as though they're late for an appointment. "Hope you don't mind heights," he says, bounding up the first few steps without looking back. Nell follows, trying to ignore the open iron latticework beneath her feet and the wind that steals under her crimson coat, freezing her stockinged legs. When they climb out onto the balcony running around the lantern, she's glad of Arthur's hand to hold, and gladder still when he puts his arm around her shoulder and draws her close, inhaling the scent of her hair, which she rinsed in lavender water just in case this situation might arise. They gaze out over London, quiet in the deep blue haze of evening. The dolphin street lamps along the embankment are shining like strings of pearls as the sinking sun outlines fleecy clouds in pink and gold. The lights of barges heading towards the docks gleam like fireflies on the water. Nell can see as far as Tower Bridge in one direction and Lambeth Bridge in another. Spot the Golden Angel glinting on the memorial outside Buckingham Palace, and glimpse Nelson standing proud on his column at Trafalgar Square. The cars crossing Westminster Bridge look like matchbox toys from this height, and the roar of the traffic is muted. She and Arthur are completely alone, with this extraordinary scene laid out before them. The sight of his serious face casts a shadow over her happiness. Now, at last, she understands why he's brought her here. "War's coming, isn't it?" she asks, so quietly that she might be talking to herself. "You want me to see the city before everything changes?" "I think it's inevitable, sadly," he replies, "and sooner rather than later." Now a terrible fear clutches her heart. "Please don't tell me you're leaving. Are you about to say goodbye?" Ridiculous tears spring to her eyes. She'll blame them on the wind. He looks away, biting his lip. "Don't go," she begs, abandoning all trace of dignity. "You needn't, Arthur, not till they send for you. Let other men play the hero." He takes her hand. "I have brought you here for a reason, but it's not that," he says, gazing into her eyes. "We haven't known each other long, dearest Nell, but it's been long enough for me to have fallen head over heels in love with you. Let's make a home and grow old together. We might never be rich, but I swear I'll move heaven and earth to make you happy. Oh, damn. I meant to do this properly." He starts patting his pockets. "Where is it? I'm sure. Ah, yes, here we are." He produces a small black box and, sinking to one knee, opens and offers it up to her. "Nell Roberts, I'm only a humble clockmaker, but would you do me the honour of becoming my wife?" When she doesn't reply instantly, he repeats with the merest hint of desperation, "Will you marry me, darling girl?" Laughing and crying at the same time, lost for even the simplest of words, Nell helps Arthur to his feet. Her expression is all the answer he needs. He takes the ring from its velvet bed and slips it on her finger, and then at last he kisses her. The most magical kiss there has ever been or will be again. At that very moment, the world explodes as the bells beneath their feet begin to chime, followed by a few seconds of silence before the mighty hammer drops and Big Ben rings out in celebration. Arthur's timing is impeccable, naturally. And there we have it.
That's so nice. Okay, so in the very prologue, you've brought in the cutest romance. You've brought in the fear of war. And I'll tell you what, that description you made about stepping out on the balcony out in front of the... Okay, I'm not good with heights. That was great.
I know. I know. You know, I've never been up the tower, up the clock tower, and I really, really want to go. But at the same time, I think apparently walking out onto that spiral metal staircase where literally there's nothing beneath you, I think is going to test me to the limit. I shall have to take a Valium first, I think.
Yes, now you have to do it, because we have little kind of small lighthouses out here that we have traveled around to in Nova Scotia, and I have trouble when it's 15 feet in the air. I can't do that, so I cannot imagine. But I have seen Big Ben up close. I think anyone who's been up there, yeah. Well, I wasn't in it, but I was close enough to stare up at it in awe. But
yeah.
Anyone who has been out over to England has seen it, I'm sure. And it's beautiful. Yes. I had no idea it sounds like it plays a central role, a really, really important role when it comes to the war. So what's that all about?
Absolutely. Absolutely. No, it really, really does. And not only in England, but also all across occupied Europe. Because the chimes of Big Ben were used to announce the 9 o'clock news on the wireless. And of course, there was no television and no internet. So everybody gathered round the wireless set to listen to that day's news. And a lot of it was very heavily censored. If there had been sort of terrible bomb strikes in the UK or very heavy losses to Allied troops overseas, then that wouldn't necessarily have been broadcast. But if there was any kind of positive news, it beamed out across the airwaves of the BBC. And people were, and with the chimes of Big Ben announcing the news, people were encouraged to think about their loved ones far away and pray for peace as Big Ben struck. And the 60 seconds of Big Ben's chimes at 9 o'clock became known as the Big Ben Silent Minute. Oh. And I know I think it played an incredibly important part in the war. And apparently afterwards, some Nazi prisoner of war confided to his British interrogator, well, the British had a secret weapon and we could never work it out, and we couldn't fight against it, but it had something to do with Big Ben and the Silent Minute.
Oh,
so you can understand what a really powerful symbol of democracy and hope it was. As long as Big Ben was chiming, then Britain still stood free and proud.
Yes, and Big Ben was never bombed, right? It was never harmed.
Well, the clock tower was bombed in 1941, but not very much damage was done, thankfully.
Yes.
It was miraculously, it carried on. I think it carried on all through the war. I think maybe there were 1 or 2 days when it didn't chime, didn't sound.
Wow.
But for most of it, it carried on through at 9 o'clock. So you can see how the Germans might have wanted to do everything they could to have destroyed this wonderful landmark.
Yeah, and so nowadays it's still such a huge symbol, and I imagine it's going under renovations right now, right? Is that what prompted you to talk about this subject and where all this information came from?
Yes, I think the idea for the book was developed very much in conjunction with Avon Books, but I think we were all thinking, well, the eyes of the world are going to be on Big Ben again. And wouldn't it be great to kind of weave a story of espionage and a love story, some history around this kind of wonderful totem, and maybe release the book in time for the end of the renovations. But then, of course, COVID struck. And so the renovations aren't going to be finished until next year.
Okay.
But it has been the most wonderful kind of operation. It's been over 4 years, and every piece, every little component of the tower, like each tile that's on the roof, has been taken off. It's been given its individual number, and these things have been sent all around the country. The tiles, the bricks, the windows, every single pane of glass in the clock dials has been recast from lovely molten, milky kind of Victorian type glass, and it's all being reassembled. So it's been, the work has been extraordinary. You just can't imagine it, really.
Yeah, how exciting to bring history into the present that way, and and rehash it all, make it even more. Oh, I love that idea. That's great. And what a wonderful thing to write about. So, and you worked with Avon about this. So
yes.
Where did the idea come from for you to move from what you have been doing, children's and YA fiction, into adult fiction?
Well, I think really it came from me mostly because when I was writing children's books, I had my own children growing up. And I was more in touch with the way that children and young people spoke and the things that were on their minds. And then my first children's books were contemporary books for middle grade, I guess. And then I wrote a short story. The first bit of historical writing I ever did about smuggling along the Dorset coast, which is where my mother lives and where my grandmothers lived. And I thought, oh, wow, I don't know about you, but I just loved writing historical fiction. Immediately, I thought, this is fantastic.
Yes.
Did you feel the same?
I've never written anything before that, but I have since tried to write other genres, but my heart is with historical fiction. It's so the research is so much more exciting and personal than I ever imagined it would be. But I love knowing that what you wrote, the Swallow Cliff Hall series, which is YA, I love that it was described sort of like a Downton Abbey series. And for me, it's thrilling to know that YA, like that kids of that age are wanting to read historical, because it seems to me it's more of an adult thing. So I love that it's the kids.
Well, yes, I have to say that my books appeared before Downton Abbey. So just in case you think I'm just kind of copying Julian Fellowes. So they were published before Downton Abbey. And I have to say they didn't sell fantastically well to young people. So I got the rights back and I released them as ebooks, and I didn't tag them as for kids. And adults absolutely fell on them, which was amazing because Downton Abbey had made country houses so popular.
Right.
And I'd written about all the things that are in the series, luckily. So I'd written about the house. I started the series in Victorian times with the kind of Victorian and Edwardian entertaining and house parties and everything very lavish. And then the second book was about the First World War, where the house becomes a hospital for wounded officers, as happened in Downton Abbey. And then I went a little bit further in the third book, and I talked about the house in 1939, when a girl arrives and meets a refugee who's come over from Germany on the Kinder transport. So it's just the start of the Second World War.
Yes.
And I think that sort of that was the kind of transition to moving from children's books to adult books, because really I wrote them as an adult would kind of want to read them. I didn't consciously sort of modify them, although of course I made the themes perhaps a little bit less shocking in places, and I was careful to try and leave some hope, because I think if you're having books that are read by young people, it's very dangerous to fill them full of despair. You know, it's hard enough being a teenager, really. So maybe I muted a little bit of that. But, you know, I think that's, and then of course I did an MA. I thought, well, I don't know, can I write as opposed to a 50,000 word book, can I write a 80,000 word book? And I did the MA and I started writing a novel there. And I've been writing that novel actually for about 8 years. And I have just finished rewriting it this morning. So if I seem slightly hysterical, that's why, because I wrote the last sentence about 3 hours ago.
Yes. Congratulations.
Yes, I know. Oh, what a feeling. It's just, you can't beat it. So that was my transition.
Wow. And oh boy, when Downton came out, you must have had mixed feelings, like, oh, that should have been my books. but also, oh, this could awaken a little interest in my book too. Yeah.
Yes, no, it was so great for me. You're exactly right, because I did actually think, oh, I wrote something just like that, and I did that too. But of course, ideas are everywhere, and Julian Fellowes does know all about. I mean, he produced Gosford Park, didn't he, the film? So he does, and he's also an aristocrat himself, whereas I'm not. And so he's kind of in that world. But I did actually send one of my books to him, because I reproduced a joke in it that I'd heard him tell on the radio. So I wrote him and said, do you mind if I use this joke? Because it's really, really funny. And he said, oh, no, fine. Go ahead, you see. Shall I tell you what the joke is? Or do you think?
Of course.
Maybe.
Of course.
Yeah, okay. So he was talking about a lady who a very grand dowager duchess. I mean, she might have been his aunt or something. And she was getting on a bus, obviously for the first time, with her young ward or her niece or something. And she got on this bus and she looked down the bus in complete horror. And she said to this girl, she said, Gwendolyn, get off the bus at once. And Gwendolyn said, why, Aunt, what's the matter? And she said, well, it's simply full of people we don't know. Which I thought was wonderful.
That's adorable.
Okay, I know. So Julian Fellowes very kindly let me use that joke.
It must have been a thrill to get a response from him.
Yes, no, it was very kind of him.
Yeah, I love that. And also, getting back to the YA theme, I discovered with my books that really YA and adults are interchangeable for a lot of people. Yeah. And a lot of adults used to be all embarrassed. So like when I was starting out reading Hunger Games, or don't tell anybody it's a kid book, but it's not. And there's so much, there's so many beautiful YA books that are out there. And, and as you say, you just hold back on some, because I think mine are sort of from grade 9 up. So they're called adult, and so interchangeable, which is great. And if we can get these books into the hands of kids, that's even better, right? To get them reading. Perfect. You must have done a lot of research for this, eh?
Yes, I did a lot of research. I spent a lot of time in the London Library, as I mentioned before, but I also had a wonderful stroke of luck, because I went to the Houses of Parliament and listened to a talk by one of the guides, Catherine Moss. And she was so interesting, and she had such a fount of knowledge that I went up to her after the talk and I told her that I was writing this book. And she has been amazing. She and a fellow guide, Lindsay Shusman, the pair of them, they are the Big Ben and Houses of Parliament experts. And they've been so generous with their time, and they've read the book. They've sent me photographs. They've told me how it feels to actually stand, to climb up inside the tower and stand on that balcony, and what you can see and what you can't see. And Catherine even solved this amazing plot problem I had. I don't want to give too much away, but at one point, Nell is imprisoned within the clock tower, and there seems to be no way out. And I had her escaping in a particular way. And Catherine said, oh, no. She said, no, that room wouldn't have been under there. You couldn't have done this. You could, And then she just said, oh, well, let me think. And she just came up as we were talking with a brilliant solution, which is just so clever. So I take my hat off to her. She's just fantastic.
Yes, I've learned that you can read all the books, all the nonfiction stuff that you want, but the best research, the best sources are the ones who are passionate about and who actually know the person on a personal level. So what a find for you. That's fantastic. And
I know. Yes, it was my lucky day.
Yeah, well, I think it'll be our lucky day that we all got to hear all of this, and I'm excited to read it. I'm glad, and yes, July 27 is when the book is published here in Canada, and it will be available right now in ebook. So it depends on if you've got your Kindle and Kobo out there, or if you need the paperback. Thank you very much, Daisy/Jenny, for speaking with me today. And all the information that I will put underneath this video, I will include the information to the Swallow Cliff Hall series as well, so that people can look
you.
that up as well. So thank you very much for speaking with me today and for introducing.
Oh, it's been my pleasure. Thank you so much for having me.
It's been great to meet you. So thank you very much and have a wonderful rest of your summer.
Thank you very much. You too. Thanks, Genevieve.
Thank you.
Bye for now.
Bye-bye.